This week, we saw Nintendo release their financial information from the previous fiscal year. And along with that, Nintendo did answer a bunch of questions from different investors. And as you would figure, a lot of it was focusing on Nintendo's next generation system, the successor to the wildly successful Nintendo Switch. And there were some interesting answers in there. One at least gives us an idea as to maybe some of the features on the next system and Nintendo's view going forward when it comes to things like digital and even development of some of these games. I mentioned I would eventually take a look at this when the official English translation was released by Nintendo, and that's now happened. So I rounded up some of the different questions and answered, cut them down a bit for time's sake, and I figured we'd go over them here today. So if you guys enjoy the video, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. Okay, so starting out, these questions, of course, came from different investors, and pretty much all the answers were from Shuntaro Furukawa, the president of Nintendo. And we'll start with the first question. This is indeed Q1, where they asked, have much of your development resources already been shifted to the successor to Nintendo Switch? I'd also like to hear about your long-term strategy for expanding your development resources. Shuntaro Furukawa follows up with answers saying, although development resources could be expanded through M&A or mergers and acquisitions, first we'll work within the company with our developers who thoroughly understand and have built up the Nintendo brand over years to have them nurture talent who can drive Nintendo's future development. In addition, many of our external development partners have gained a deep understanding of Nintendo's way of thinking and game development methods over the many years of collaboration, and we would like to further strengthen our ties with such partners. The process of game development will inevitably become longer, more complex, and more advanced. And that is something that Nintendo will have to deal with, similar to how Sony and Microsoft kind of going through it now. Nintendo, even though you look at something like The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, that feels like it did take a while considering it was a sequel to Breath of the Wild and use like the same map for the most part. While they did add, I understand, kind of like the underground and then also the sky areas, they still leveraged a lot of stuff from Breath of the Wild to create it, but it still also took a while. And I think Nintendo is starting to come to terms that, wow, game development is becoming more and more complex. It is going to take a while for some of these big-time Mario or Zelda games. Even Metroid Prime 4, while I know that went through struggles, that's still part of the development process. Announced in 2017. We're hoping that it comes out holiday. So 2024, 7 years from 7.5 years from announcement to release. Yeah, I think that's going to become very common, even for Nintendo for some of these titles. So in their mind, looking around, continuing their relationships with different partners, that is a big thing for them going forward. Also, when it comes to merger and acquisitions, I feel like Nintendo is very careful about this, and the reason they make a move on something like Next Level is because they were looking to sell, and that's a very important partnership and studio for Nintendo. So in their mind, that investment is worth buying at Next Level. Also, they worked with them for a while. So going out and just finding studios just to find them doesn't really seem to fit in with Nintendo. However, if Intelligent Systems, for example, if ownership there is thinking they're going to sell, I wouldn't be shocked if Nintendo decided to move in and pick them up. So really, it's more like defensive acquisitions on Nintendo's part. But moving on to the second question, which is indeed still question 2, are you thinking that announcing a successor system will not affect the momentum of the Nintendo Switch business? This is very important because, of course, their forecast, as they say here, the sales forecast for the current fiscal year does not include the successor to Nintendo Switch. We're going to come back to that in a second. He goes on to say, we do not think the announcement of the successor to Nintendo Switch and future related announcements or communications will have zero impact on Nintendo Switch sales. However, we hope to maximize sales this fiscal year by maintaining a good balance between new demand and demand for multiple systems. Our hardware sales forecast of 13.5 million units for the fiscal year will not be easily achieved, but with the intention of challenging ourselves, we have set this number as the initial fiscal year guidance, which guidance can change. And really, if you're these investors and Nintendo announces this new system and there's a lot of excitement, you're seeing dollar signs, you probably don't really care if the current Switch, the guidance is lowered. So instead of 13.5, they're like, hey, we're going to sell 11.5. You're like, okay, when's the next system coming out? That's all you're really going to be eyeing up at that point and focusing on. But them saying that this sales forecast for the current fiscal year does not include the successor to Nintendo Switch, did spur on all kinds of reports and articles around the idea that that means that the next system from Nintendo is not releasing before April 1st, 2025, and that's not the case. That's not necessarily what this means. It could, sure, Nintendo's next system could end up in next fiscal year, but they can also revise their guidance and add in what their thoughts are on sales for this next system with the forecast. And I do still think they're going to get this system launched in March, so they're just going to make it into the fiscal year, which realistically they're going to tack on in the case of 3 weeks, whatever they're able to produce, really, right? Which we'll get to that here soon too. Maybe they'll tack on 2.5 to 3 million in that first 3 or 4 weeks, and then it's okay, our guidance is now raised to this much, and they're off and running at that point with the new launch. Now, moving on to question 3, it says, one of the fields you define for cash utilization is foundation for maintaining and expanding relationships with consumers, and your Nintendo account initiatives are included in this field. Will you continue to make active use of Nintendo account with the successor to Nintendo Switch? Furukawa did answer, in terms of the foundation for maintaining and expanding relationships with customers, our efforts are centered around Nintendo account to improve user experience and create new added value. One example of cash utilization in this regard is the establishment of Nintendo Systems as a joint venture with DNA. Nintendo account was prepared before the launch of Nintendo Switch as a way to maintain long-term relationships with consumers across hardware generations. So we will continue to make active use of Nintendo account with the successor to Nintendo Switch as well. This should not surprise anyone that Nintendo account system, the one you've been linking all of your digital purchases to, will follow you to the next generation system. It's felt like this entire time, the entire way, that is the intention for Nintendo. They've reached this point where, okay, previously they didn't have that. But with the Switch, they introduced Nintendo accounts, and that will just continue on in the future. It's a way for them to maintain that consumer relationship, as they say, beyond just a single generation. And in fact, when you take a look at some of the stats for their monthly active users or annual active users being over 120 million at this time, yeah, Nintendo wants to continue that relationship as much as possible. Just, it works to make the transition from one generation to the next significantly easier. And I am hoping that with this next system, because now I fully expect backwards compatibility just about across the board, minus things like maybe Labo, where the new system won't quite fit. I expect it to be a replacement system, essentially, as in you take the old Switch away with the dock, you put the new one down, you log into your account, and then all of your digital games are there, your memberships, whatever you've signed up for, and you're off and running. Moving on to question 4, I think one big change over the life cycle of Nintendo Switch is the remarkable growth in digital sales. Looking back at the progress of the digital business and its contribution to financial results thus far, I would like to know what expectations you have for the digital business over the life cycle of the successor to Nintendo Switch. Answer from Furukawa is, our objective is not to simply increase the share of digital sales, but to maximize overall game software sales, including sales of physical software. This policy will remain unchanged going forward. In this context, we need to enhance user friendliness for both consumers who play packaged software and those who play download versions. Going forward, we intend to keep working on improvements to devise better solutions. Compared to 2017, when the Nintendo Switch was launched, digitalization has progressed in many aspects of our lives. At this moment, if digital content continues to become more useful and convenient over time, we believe that more of our consumers will choose digital products with the successor to Nintendo Switch, just as they did with Nintendo Switch. So it is interesting to note that in their financial briefing, some of their explanatory details and the slides they put out did show that they have continued to increase sort of their digital footprint in terms of their sales, to the point where when you add up everything, across all of their sales in their business, they had a 50.2% split in digital's favor. That does include, however, digital or download-only games, as well as packaged games, right? So you go into a store, you buy Mario Odyssey physically, but there's also that download version. That download version, with the revenue generated, does also go in with microtransactions, expansion passes, that sort of thing, right? So while I don't think we're necessarily there yet with physical being overtaken by digital with Nintendo for packaged goods, it's very clear that people are spending more money than ever before with Nintendo for the digital side. And they are very aware of that, but they're also saying hey, physical's going to live on with us for now, right? Like next generation, which again, I think most people expected this. There will be cartridges, I'm sure, of some kind. It's been discussed that there will be a cartridge slot that will also take current Switch games, and kind of like the DS to the 3DS situation. And I fully expect that now as well. I think this is going to just be pretty much an upgrade to the Switch in its overall concept, but of course it should be much more powerful based on some of the specifications that are going around now. But this just makes sense for Nintendo to continue their physical business because it's not some crazy split of like 90% digital, 10% physical where you start really evaluating that. Nintendo still very much holding up kind of that packaged goods industry for video games, and maybe they'll reevaluate halfway through the generation, maybe towards the end of the generation. Like, okay, well, everything around us is digital now. Maybe the PS6 doesn't have any kind of disc slot, and it's just, okay, it's just digital. Xbox is all digital, and that's just kind of how people's expectations are then coming into gaming, with the next generation showing up. And Nintendo, I'm sure, can pivot and do an all digital Switch 2 in like the last year or so of that generation to see how things go. But for now, expect to have packaged goods for your Switch 2. And finally, question 5. Given the recent improvements in the semiconductor market, do you think it is likely that you will be able to ship enough units of the successor to Nintendo Switch to meet the demand right from the time of launch? The answer from Furukawa is regarding the supply of the successor to Nintendo Switch. We cannot give a specific answer as we have not yet announced the timing of the launch. However, currently there is no semiconductor shortage like we saw up until 2022, so we are not anticipating the supply of semiconductor components to be a major issue when we launch the successor to Nintendo Switch. You know, there's two minds of thought here for me. One, I get excited when new hardware comes up. So whether it's a new PlayStation, Xbox, a new Nintendo system, it's like, all right, cool, we're getting this new system. And then the other side of me is like, that is going to be really annoying to get that system. Like, in terms of just finding it, availability, having to go out to a midnight release, wait in line for hours potentially, or fight these different bots and scalpers online so that it goes up for sale and then it's gone immediately, and then you're dealing with the secondhand market where it's like 200-300% markup. And yes, we were dealing with the semiconductor shortage that was ongoing for a while, and that made even the Switch difficult to find. The PS5 was like crazy prices there for a while. But still, looking towards launches of these different systems, I do get concerned that it's going to be really frustrating trying to find one. So it is good that investors are already asking Nintendo about potential supply issues with this system, because, I mean, think about the Switch when that launched, incredibly popular. Coming off of the Wii U that was not popular, 13.5 million sold. Now, going into the successor with the potential for the Switch to be Nintendo's best-selling system ever at that time of launch, right? Let's say they meet their expected forecast and they're at like 154.5 million. Yeah, it'd be above the DS. Now we're going into this next system. You have this massive install size that most likely will have a digital library built up, or just physical games that they want to then upgrade to the next system. It potentially could be absolute mayhem, even if Nintendo is able to push out some crazy high amount of like 5 or 10 million in the first run. I feel like even that wouldn't be enough. So exciting stuff when we hear about the new hardware. We hear the release date, but then that buildup, that is going to be really annoying as well. But those are some of the more pertinent questions and excerpts that I picked out here from the official Nintendo English transcript that they released. Again, I'll leave it linked down below if you want to go through everything that they said there. But for the most part, investors asked some good questions with the limited amount of information that Nintendo put out there and was willing to put out there. Nintendo is still very much in this secretive state around their new hardware, but fortunately, it shouldn't be too much longer until they're ready to talk about it. And as of now, we're rolling into this June Nintendo Direct where hopefully they're ready to talk about some games to launch at the end of this year. And please, let one of those games be Metroid Prime 4. But let me know what you guys think about all this stuff down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.